My name is Donna Ashley, and I'm here in New York City, and I am a board member of the Episcopal Parish Network Board. And so I'm happy to be filling in for Joe, and welcome everybody to raise more money in 1 to 3 hours a week with these amazing panelists. So I am reading Joe's notes that told me what to do. There is information in the chat about becoming a member if your parish isn't a member of the EPN network, and you can reach out to Joe through the email that is listed there. Please try to enter your name and where you're calling in from in the chat. I have enabled the chat so that everybody can see everybody else's chat, and we'd like to know who you are and where you're dialing in from. And I was told to turn it over to Luke. Are you ready to take things over at this point, Luke? And thank you everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you very much. And I see even if folks are signing in, this is great.
Yeah, great.
Folks, I feel like I'm a guy from a radio show. Hello, Lexington, Kentucky. So I really appreciate everybody joining. I really enjoy these sessions that EPN does, where I think it not only has really good content, but it also enables you to sort of, interact with some other folks from other parts of the country, because, every congregation is unique, but a lot of us have similarities. So there's a lot we can kind of learn from each other and what folks are doing and using. So today is talking a little bit about plan giving or gift planning. Sometimes people use different phrasing, but the idea is, how can we do that more thoughtfully and effectively? We have a kind of a nice little deck of information here. I'm joined by some great friends and colleagues. So maybe Chris, if you could go to the next slide. I think we have all our bios of everybody that's in the next slide or two. And people are still signing in. So we're up to about 60 or so, which is great. So joining us as guest panelists, one, we have Jean McGee, who's one of our wonderful friends and volunteers from Church of Holy Communion, which is in Memphis, Tennessee. And Jean is, I think, a second now, maybe even third, but at least second generation communicant at Church of Holy Communion. So been there quite a while, for a long time. Also, Pam O'Halloran, who's on the staff at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Cleveland Heights, is also joining us. And each of them will be kind of sharing some of their experiences, both on the volunteer and staff side. And Pam's kind of worn both hats, even been the campaign chair before at her congregation. I'm one of the partners at CCS, and I run our Washington, D.C. office. And I'm also joined by Chris Dake, who's one of our VPs, and also has a lot of background and experience, in particular in gift planning and working with the church. So we have a nice agenda here today. I think, Chris, if we go to the next slide, we have a little bit about CCS. CCS has been around for a long time, so we've been around for 75 years. We do a lot of work with churches of all different sizes, all different types, from rural to urban. So we have a lot of experience working with the church, but we also work with a lot of other nonprofits across all different sectors. In terms of today's goals, before I turn it over to Chris, is just to define it. So what do we mean when we talk about gift planning? Kind of dive into a little bit of the kind of moment we are in terms of philanthropy and the landscape. You'll hear a lot about there's a big transition of wealth that's coming. Talk a little bit about what we can do in 1 to 3 hours a week. And I would even say, for a few of you slackers out there, what you can do in 1 to 3 hours in a month. And you want to work up to get to 1 to 3 hours in a week. But the idea is, what can you do to start to implement that in a thoughtful way, in a meaningful way? And then we'll talk a little bit about how planned giving can drive some results. So we'll have some takeaways at the end of this, try to keep it tight. I'll try to monitor the chat from here on, Chris, and hopefully it gets lit up with lots of questions, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be with you. And please do interrupt me. I'm managing the deck, but I won't be able to see if there's any questions that pop up. So just interrupt me, please. So we want to begin whenever we're talking about gift planning or planned giving or deferred gifts or any of these words, bequests, wills, annuities. We want to make sure that we're defining all of these words so that we have a basic understanding. And what we like to do is put them into three categories: gift planning, plan giving, and then deferred gifts. Now, gift planning is about culture. It's about a way of fundraising that is institutional, donor-centric, and it's focused on non-cash assets. Now, planned giving is about either a specific program that you might have, or maybe an organization that you're working with also has, but it's also a strategy that you want to implement with a specific donor. And then a deferred gift is just a tool. In this case, we're going to be talking about bequests mostly, and that is a deferred gift. That is a tool within planned giving because you have a culture of gift planning. So now that we have all of those defining word definitions, let's go into understanding the philanthropic landscape and potential in planned giving. This is going to involve two reports. One is the Giving USA report, which is the standard in philanthropy that comes out. It'll be coming out next month, I think, that defines philanthropy across all sectors. And then the individual report that CCS Fundraising puts out, our Philanthropy Pulse, which has some really good information in terms of planned giving. So this is a unique moment in philanthropy, and I want to focus on four areas right off the bat. $64 trillion will move from the baby boomer generation to their heirs over the next couple decades. It should really reach its peak about 2030. Now, the pandemic and the economic shifts over the past 3 years that we've all experienced, it's given us the opportunity to meet in Zoom, but it's had its challenges, but it has shown that it can't really put a dent in philanthropy. Philanthropy is resilient. There might be fewer donors, but they are very sophisticated. They are giving in many different vehicles. One vehicle that's growing in popularity is donor advised funds, which are mechanisms where people get immediate tax benefit and then are able to determine where those gifts go over a longer period of time. There's retirement accounts and other vehicles that fall into that sophistication. And so the last one is we want to make sure that our nonprofit partners, specifically our Episcopal Church partners, have the sophistication to match what donors are doing in this space. And as I mentioned, CCS put out a second edition of our 2023 Philanthropy Pulse report, which provides a window into the fundraising practices of nearly 1,200 organizations based on data that we collected in the fall of 2022. And here are three important gift planning takeaways. We see that a lot of our partners have a low-level expertise, which we hope to address today. DAFs are deferred gifts, which we see the most, which is what I mentioned before. And that continues to grow each and every year. So donor advised funds are an important vehicle that are only going to become more prominent in philanthropy. And finally, the good news is that more than half of our partners expect an increase in deferred gifts this year. So, and we're already seeing that with some of the partners that Luke and I are working with right now. Continuing on with this Philanthropy Pulse report, we see that
going out.
You still with us, Gene? I can still see you. Okay. We see that organizations, the percentage of those organizations in their budgets that receive non-cash assets are anywhere from none to 20%. That's 71% of the respondents. So 71 respondents have said up to 20% non-cash assets are a part of their budget. So that means that there's a wealth of money out there in this transfer. There's a wealth of opportunity, and I use that word, no pun intended, for us to really show fundraising growth. And then the three areas to the left, what are the greatest obstacles preventing organizations from achieving and receiving these types of gifts? Well, we talked about the economy. There's not much we can do about it, but also the readiness of the organizations to do this, to take on these type of gifts, and the knowledge, the staff, the volunteers, and even the donors themselves. So there's a lot of opportunities. We're going to cover 2 of the 3. So that's good, right? So when we talk about popularity in deferred gifts, bequests are at the top. So in 2021, almost $485 billion were given in philanthropy, and 46% were given by bequests. And the average age, and this is something that I'll bring up all the time, what's interesting is we see that the average donor who make their first will, their first bequest, is the age 44. So planned giving, the strategy to talk to people, can be done earlier and earlier. And then adding the first beneficiary to a will happens around the age of 53. So each year, bequests are the most common. You can see other deferred gift tools as well, but bequests are by far the most popular. And so when we talk about wealth and as people age, it's pretty clear that when we get older, our wealth becomes more stationed in non-cash assets. It's not liquid cash. So in your 40s, you have cash, you probably own a house, and you have a vehicle. Those are where your assets are. And as you get older, you build a bigger stock portfolio, you have a more robust retirement fund. And then when you enter the 70s, your 70s and 80s, you continue to build on all of those things. You probably have expanded your real estate investments. You're more into mutual funds. You probably have a fixed income. And you have, as Gene has, many business interests. And so these are all things to take note of when you're discussing planned giving strategies and the tools to use to help donors achieve the benefit of supporting each of your churches. So let's get into the nit and gritty here. So we told you that you can do this type of fundraising if you spend 1 to 3 hours a week. And as Luke mentioned at the beginning, if you have no knowledge of this at all, it's kind of like when you're going to the gym for the first time and you need to get back in shape. You're not going to go to the gym 4 times a week, right? You're going to start off a little slow, and you're going to get used to, and you're going to build that confidence. And really, that confidence is a commitment to planned giving. And here are 8 different items. And by the way, this deck will be sent to everybody. I probably should have led with that, as it is with every Zoom meeting. The deck will be shared with everybody who is here and who has signed up. But I have some questions to ask, just rhetorical. When you're talking about fundraising, do you think about it more as a transaction? Meaning, are you worried more about cash now versus cash later? Do you spend most of your time seeking new donors, maybe those parishioners that don't give every Sunday, or feel like they have low donations? Are you capable of taking on new challenges? Do they excite you? Do you have enough patience? And really, do you have a clarity of purpose? Do you have the confidence? Can you hold each other accountable? Can you build on momentum? Are you willing to educate yourself? Do the identification of people that would fit the type of deferred gifts that you would like to do in each of your parish? Making sure that the strategies are donor-centric. It's not a one type of action to fit everything. And do you take action? So these last 4, education, identification, strategy, and action, are really what we want to focus when we talk about what you can do 1 to 3 hours a week. Now, as I mentioned, if you're starting with from the beginning, don't think of this so much as time management, but think about it more as attention management, because what you pay attention to will be your experience. So if you want to have a strong planned giving program because you have built a gift planning culture, make sure that you're allocating your attention to the 4 different areas: education, identification, strategy, and action. Now, what the heck does all of this mean? Education, identification, strategy, and action. Well, when you think about education, we'll give you some resources of where you can learn more about planned giving, learn more about bequests, the language. There's tremendous videos out there. Every church should have a gift acceptance policies. Your identification just means, how do you know your donors? Your strategy, the events that you have to cultivate a legacy society. I know that Luke and I are working with Gene and our friends at the Church of Holy Communion, that Gene will talk about more, where we're looking to build out that legacy society. And then the actions, things that you actually do. And think about it internally and externally. What are you doing internally to grow the program? And what are you doing externally to grow the program? Now, I have a whole bunch of slides that I'm not going to share with you today, but they're a part of the appendix or appendices that are at the bottom. There's about 7 slides at the back end that will talk more about examples and talk a little bit more about specifics. But for educational purposes, here are some resources, some key content, just something for you to review, and places that you can go in terms of how you can do your education. Your identification, your data analysis, just some ideas for you to consider to get to know your donors. How often do they give? When was the last time, if you did a capital campaign, when's the last time they made a payment on that capital campaign pledge? What was the amount of their gifts? And also really understand their involvement in other organizations, what they value. Make sure that you're keeping track of their ages and their marital statuses, because when you know these things, you know when life changes are happening, that prevents or provides an opportunity to have further conversations to make sure that the church is still a part of their long-term planned gift strategies, and making sure that you're doing the stewardship. And so strategies, resourcing, there's an internal, as I mentioned, internal and external component to this. Internal, 3 different areas to think about. Staffing, do we have the support staff to make this successful? Are we a shop of 1 or 2 or 3 people that can do this? Do we have the leadership as they do, the volunteer leadership as they do at St. Paul's and at Holy Church of the Holy Communion, that they have volunteers that are willing to educate themselves and to do the action, and make sure that your volunteers are engaged, that they communicate effectively of the goals that everyone's trying to achieve. And then here's just some ideas in terms of action and marketing. Our Pam and Jean will talk more about this specifically with their churches and the projects that CCS has worked with them. But make sure that you're getting the message out. You're using all of your updated communications channels. Church of the Holy Communion has some great communications channels that they use consistently. Invest time in making sure that you have collateral, such as a brochure, an online presence. And one of the things that we did really recently that was effective is sending out a survey or a postcard, letting people know, asking for information, taking that information, and then doing more action. Okay, so Luke, I think that I've gone through, I'll stop there to see if there's any questions. Are there any questions so far? because we have now reached the great part of the presentation where I stop talking. So this is, everyone should be excited about that. That should be blowing up the chat with excitement. But is there any questions that we have?
I think so far everyone's been kind of, I think, soaking it all in.
Soaking it all in.
So I think we're now at that stage where as folks start to think about, Chris kind of laid out some terms and things for us. So that's where I think we can encourage people to start to think about, what are some of the questions that you have? What do you see as some of maybe the obstacles to getting started? Peter, you said we're kind of building a program. You talked a little bit about how do you build that culture? So when you say building a culture of gift planning, what does that mean, Chris? So when you say a culture.
Sure. No, it is all inclusive. The leadership, the congregation, everyone understands that plan giving strategy and the tools are a part of your giving to the church. And so everybody understands, everybody continues to educate themselves, everybody looks to see what they could be doing to invest more of their wealth, which comes from non-cash assets, to really help ensure that the mission is being accomplished, making sure that the maintenance of the church itself, any sort of new initiatives, if you wanted to expand, say, youth outreach, you have the ability, because there's a gift planning culture where people are investing the majority of where their wealth comes from to the church. And when you have that gift planning culture, you will see that your annual giving will go up. People that put organizations in their wills tend to increase their giving on an annual basis, because nothing says investment or caring than providing a gift to your church after you had passed.
That's great, Chris. And I think Peter said, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. And I think that's the idea of a culture of giving, across the way. It just becomes, this is something we do at St. Margaret's, at, Holy Communion, wherever it might be. And so I think part of that is, as Chris said, it's sort of a shared understanding, but also it's a shared communication and celebration of those types of things.
And Luke, I'll just add, when we had a recent chat with our friends, Jean and the Church of the Holy Communion, you brought up a good point in terms of when you build that culture, it then becomes a part of a welcome packet that you would do with new parishioners. So the people who have been there have done it, and now the people who are just experiencing the church for the first time understand that this is a part of it as well. So Luke, any other questions? Because now we can get to the Jean and Pam portion of this.
There are one or two in there. We'll postmark one, because Betsy had a question about they were going to be doing a campaign in a year or two, and she was talking about plan giving with a capital campaign, and that's Betsy, that's what Pam's working on now. So I think in her talk, it'll probably speak to your question. And the other one question maybe we'll hit before we transition. John had kind of talked about what impact does the financial stability of the organization. So has the church been financially stable, or maybe not stable? How much does that impact people's receptivity to making, a gift of this nature? If the church is in a strong or weak or somewhere in between, Chris.
Yeah, I don't want to jump in on Jean's presentation, but that's one of the questions that we wanted to make sure that we were answering when we talk about the endowment campaign that we're doing with the Church of the Holy Communion, is that the church is in good financial stability, and there's no debt, there's nothing, we're not trying to pay off loans or anything of that nature. Fundraising is primarily based in confidence in the leadership, confidence in the communication of what the intention of the fundraising campaign. So you want to be in a position where this is just an extension of what you've been doing successfully. And if right now, if the church is seeing a decline in annual giving, tithing, things of that nature, I think it's important to talk about the reasons why that is, and how, how can we help solidify that, and then make a transition where we can build that gift planning culture from a place of success.
Great.
All right.
When we shift over, and there were one or two other ones, but we'll shift over. I'll introduce them because I think they were germane to each of these situations.
Great. Thank you. Did you want to introduce Jean, or do you want
Just a little introduction to Jean, and Church of the Holy Communion. It's a wonderful community. It's relatively young compared to some of there's a few churches that are on here that are well over 100 years old. So it's a relatively young congregation, pretty good size, about 600 families. You can see the annual operating budget a little below $2 million. It's in a lovely part of Memphis, Tennessee, and sort of shares a campus with a grade 3 through 12 girls' school. So there's a lot of families that are both St. Mary's families as well as Holy Communion families. So they share the same campus. So it's a very vibrant place, and the place is always very busy. And so there's lots of, also because of the school, multi-generation families that are out there. So we turn it over to Jean. You could talk a little bit about some of the recent history and things you're working on now.
Thank you, Luke. Yes, as the guys mentioned, I actually am a third generation of Holy Communion, but there are not very many of us, because the church in 2025 will be celebrating our 75th anniversary at this location. And so we're not an old church. There are older churches in downtown Memphis, but we don't have that kind of history. We have a very dynamic rector. We have been really vibrant even throughout the pandemic. And we, over the last 7 years, spent a lot of time, money, and effort on a capital campaign that raised about $12 million. And I think the first phase was about 8.5, and then the remainder was in the second phase of the campaign. And honestly, endowment wasn't talked a lot. It didn't come up very much because it was all about the capital campaign. So with a campus the size that we have and a congregation the size that we are, we knew that our endowment was really lagging for a church of our size. So when I was asked to take on the challenge of raising our endowment, I would say intimately aware of how important it was, having just rolled off the vestry back in January. And so I took this on even before I rolled off the vestry. I could see how the health of the church was really dependent on the endowment, because as people's annual fund giving fluctuates and maybe even goes down as far as number of givers, the good news is the people who are giving substantially, but we don't want to be in a position where we only rely on annual fund giving for the future. For the financial security of the church, we know how important the endowment is. Chris and Luke helped us, and we put together a survey, and we sent it out back at the first of the year to about 540 of our parishioners. And of those 540, 100 people responded that they were interested in hearing more about the endowment, which we were really happy with that kind of response. And we even found out there were about 15 people who had put Holy Communion in their will, and we were unaware as a church. And these people continue to sort of pop up out of the woodwork. Since we sent the survey out and have started the conversation, we've had 2 more people say, before even we had any kind of educational event, they went ahead and added Holy Communion to their wills. So all they needed was just a little encouragement and to put it sort of in the forefront of their mind. We had 2 events last month. One was held at the church. The other one was held at a private home. And we had about a total of 25 people attend these events. And our next plan is to follow up with them. And I have a committee of 3. It's just me and 2 more. But our intention is to enlarge our committee when we get to the one-on-one asking phase of the plan. And we have a lofty goal of raising $5 million by our 75th anniversary year. So we have no small task. And we know we're not a church of 3 givers are going to get us halfway there. We are much more a church of many modest givers will pave the way for this to happen. The wisdom, I see the question, the wisdom
Okay,
of
great.
asking members if they've already included the parish in their will is that many times the church is sort of the last to know if someone has included the church in their will. And by asking people, we hope to establish, when we were talking about, when Chris was talking about the culture, we hope to establish a giving culture. And by recognizing people who have become members of a legacy society, we are hoping to create more conversation around giving and to be able to thank the people who have, while they're still here, who have included people, who have included the church in their will, which will hopefully encourage others. There's nothing wrong with a little peer pressure to encourage others to say, oh, Pam's giving to the church. I didn't even really think about adding the church to our will. And knowing how simple it is to just really add a codicil to your will makes it easy, simple, stupid to include the church in your will. You could certainly
Jean gets an A for saying all the right things. My goodness.
Right.
be trained to be well.
It's the reason why she's so successful in her regular life. So I think that that's so true, is that we are kind of a country of joiners. There's a reason why we group together in community, because we want to be together. So I think that's the idea, is one, you want to hold up people who've been thoughtful and have done this, and you want to thank them. And Jean brings up a very good point. There's a statistic where it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of nonprofit organizations, including churches, when they find out about the plan, the gift that's been made in the estate, it's when the attorney calls and says, oh, Mr. Dake left you guys some money. So to Jean's good point is, you didn't get a chance to sort of hold up Mr. Dake and say, hey, thanks for doing this, and encouraging others to do that. And you also didn't get a chance to say thank you because you didn't know about it. So it's a nice way to make that part of something that we do. And that's just something that it's all proportionate. So the idea is, this is very much more about participation, because ultimately gifts like this, we want everybody can play a role. This isn't like just sort of the area of the kind of big givers per se. A lot of people ask questions in the chat. Hey, can you get a copy of that amazing, super sophisticated survey? We had 4 questions in the survey, everybody.
Yeah.
So I think, like most surveys, I think we question people to ask them to do too much. So to highlight what it was, we asked people, one, did they understand kind of the information about the endowment, its uses, what was it about? Here, Chris is pulling up this incredibly sophisticated document that was created. But essentially, it was a very simple 4-question survey where we asked them, is the kind of church included in their estate plans? If so, would you let us know? If not, would you be interested in learning more about this? Would you be willing to come to some kind of educational events? So Chris will pull it up here in a second, but you'll see the depth of the survey is it's a kiddie pool deep. So, but that's also, I think, why we got a very significant level of participation, because it was a very easy, quick survey for people to sort of answer. And so, as Jean talked about, I think actually, Jean, I think we had closer to even 120, 130 that responded. So it was again, a simple tool, but a way to engage everybody. Here Chris goes. So again, just how are people feeling about it?
Yeah, we did ask.
Didn't we take that one out though?
Oh yeah, we did. We did take that one out. We put it in, the questions were, the questions were, what other vehicles do you use?
Right.
Have you given to the church? Are you interested? And what's your address?
Yes.
And
yeah. So
and I
we
think
can provide that in the follow-up to everybody, but
yeah,
it
sorry, I
was
was pulling up old ones. Ones.
Well,
But
we again, I think we did the tendency that we all do, which is overcomplicate things. So the idea was we were trying to have conversations, and as Jean said, we had two lovely, engaging sessions where folks talked about, the church and what was important and how they could help. So we can certainly give you the actual questions, but just for everybody to know that they won't take very long.
I think the subject line was, do you have 2 minutes to answer some questions? So
Yep.
Yeah. So
And one of the things that was blatantly obvious, I would say, especially about the second information session that we had, when I looked around the room, it was talking with past members of the Capitol campaign, past vestry members, really very dedicated and active members of the church. So it was like talking to family about giving to family. And so that was a great way to start. Those will probably be some of the people that I'm able to go back to and say, now that you have chosen to be a member of the Legacy Society, would you be willing to partner with us on some of these asks, so that our ask committee is more of a 10 to 12 person group that doesn't tax my little committee members quite so much.
yeah.
There are two questions that popped up in the chat. One was, is there sort of some wisdom or thought to inviting sort of just the Legacy Society members to kind of a reception versus inviting everyone? I think it's always better if you're having a reception for something, if it's sort of meant to be for the congregation. I think it's always better inviting everybody to it and then highlighting the people who've joined. That I think most people don't necessarily need to join a special club for the Legacy Society. You certainly can recognize them in lists. You can recognize them at the annual meeting. Some places will even give people little pins or other types of things that sort of highlight their participation, but it's always better to include everybody, and then you could sort of call out a little group within the larger group that's doing something and try to, ideally, you get to a point where we all do that.
We one important thing about the survey, we segmented it out to members who were 45 or older and had given to the church at least $2,000. So we segmented it towards that to see, and we had just outstanding responses. So,
and the question was
sorry.
asked if we did the same program both nights, and we did. We had one of the investment professionals that actually manages our endowment come and do an info session just about planned giving. And then one night Luke spoke for a few minutes and I spoke for a few minutes, but he did a little info session. And it was very informal, lots of questions.
And there was a question too about connecting, the endowment, planned giving to the annual pledge campaign. And maybe that might be a good thing for us to kind of, as we, segue into Pam's portion of the discussion too, because that was some questions that we were having too about that piece of it. So feel free to throw other questions in about Holy Communion and Jean, but I'm also looking at the clock. We're about 3:40 right now, East Coast time. So I want to make sure we still get to our other content. And let me just push this down. So a little bit about St. Paul's in lovely Cleveland Heights, Ohio. So again, in one of the older churches, a beautiful, grand church too. It's just a gorgeous structure, which you also look at a building like that and say, oh, everything costs a lot of money to fix here because it is a big, gorgeous, grand structure. About 700 families, operating budget almost approaching 2.5 million. And just a wonderful, vibrant, parish. And we're currently doing some work with Pam and her congregation. And Pam's worn a couple hats there, both as a member herself. She's been on the vestry before, and also now she's on the staff there. So she's kind of worn every different hat and sort of understands how folks are coming from lots of different angles. So Pam, why don't you talk a little bit about what we're doing at St. Paul's right now?
Sure. Thank you, Luke. At St. Paul's, we've had a Plan Giving Society for, I'm guessing at least over 40 years. But the activity of the Planned Giving committee has not been consistent. So it kind of goes in waves depending on who's chairing the committee and who are the members. Several years ago, a revived committee sent out letters to those known members of the Legacy Society to confirm or update our records. And that was helpful. We learned quite a lot during that. It was also a good opportunity just to touch base. We identified prospects for a renewed effort to increase the number of planned gifts. And we created new Legacy Society material. So a new brochure, new booklet, gift intention form, new letterhead, all of that. We also crafted messages to be run in monthly e-news or e-news newsletter. And we also include maybe once or twice a year a message when we send out pledge statements. So we have a little card that goes along with that, and just asks people about Plan Giving and notifies them that we have a society and who to contact if they're interested. And on our annual fund pledge forms, we do always have a box that says, have you included St. Paul's in your Planned Giving? And we have identified people that way that were not previously known to us. So that was really, that I would recommend that to everybody. So we then we started holding receptions. We have periodically held, to the previous question, we have held receptions to thank our Plan Giving Legacy Society members. However, we do target individuals, households who are not members and invite them as prospects, which is it's for dual reasons for holding these. We want to say thank you to those who have let us, who have made plan gifts, but we really want to encourage others to do that. And so having a room full of people who are passionate about Plan Giving really helps. And we include testimonials. We have somebody who's made a plan gift talk about why they did it. And recently we've introduced the concept of endowing one's pledge. So if you think about, particularly some of our, we are in the Rust Belt in Cleveland. So, the heyday of Cleveland was probably in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And so there was a lot of wealth, but some of that wealth is declining. So, but that old wealth, to Chris and Luke's point, there's still a lot of wealth there. So there's a lot that we want to take advantage of. And so we introduced the concept of endowing one's pledge. So if somebody is currently giving $10,000 a year, to think of a planned gift that would enable that $10,000 to continue in as a gift to the church through annual income from the endowment. So that those can be large numbers, but at least it gets people thinking about what's an appropriate planned gift. If they're giving $10,000 a year and they leave us a planned gift of $10,000, you could realize, that doesn't go very far. So for many years, we've been concerned about a cohort of very generous donors who were moving through their 70s, 80s, and now all into their 90s. And we knew that when those pledges went away, we would have significant budget challenges. So we knew that the endowment is a critical key to that. We're currently our endowment free. The last turn down was about almost $12 million. But we knew we needed to grow that. And so we engaged CCS to help us with a capital campaign, unlike our previous capital campaign that was entirely capital in terms of capital projects. This one, we're seeking to raise $6 million, and of that, 3.5 will be for growing the endowment. And then the rest is $2 million for capital projects and $500,000 for outreach. But we know that's not going to be enough. So that $3.5 million will be enormously helpful, but we need to continue to talk about planned giving. That would be a capital campaign gift to go to, that we would be adding to the endowment. But at the same time, we need to have people thinking about that third kind of gift, annual giving, capital gifts, but then there's planned gifts. And so how do we continue to educate people about planned giving? So we're trying to weave that in without capitalizing the capital campaign. We don't want people to say, oh, well, we'll just make a planned gift and not make a major gift to this, a cash gift now to the plan. So we don't want that necessarily, but we do want people to be creative and thinking ahead. So so we're using the campaign as a way to talk about planned giving. For those who are over 75, we do include the Legacy Society brochure in our campaign materials. We are open to the conversation. If they want to ask about how they might make a more significant gift to the capital campaign, then we will engage in that conversation. But we do plan to move into deeper conversations about planned giving as we move through this campaign. We have talked with Luke and our consultant on the ground about the survey, doing a survey, and we think that that's a great idea, and we're looking forward to doing that so that we can better identify some of those who may be thinking about planned giving, but they haven't identified themselves to us yet, and we can then continue the conversation and using the capital campaign and the campaign to grow the endowment as a sort of launch board, that we can use that to continue the conversation, and almost like what Jean has done at her church, because they had the major campaign and now they're having an endowment campaign. So we're trying to tie ours more closely together. So it all feels great, and our committee is pumped, and so far the people that we've been in conversation with have been excited. As you know, again, as Jean says, that we're family and we're giving to family, and so getting people to think more deeply about all of their gifts and all of the ways in which they can support the church it's great to do it holistically, and we're excited to move forward with that.
I think the key with both communities is also just the ongoing communication. As Pam talked about, having those kind of things where we're talking about planned giving and just giving in general, and the impact that our gifts that we can make, weaved kind of throughout all the things you're doing. Then again, Peter kind of asked that question earlier about a culture. That's it. It's sort of getting people who are thinking about they can do that. So this is, I think at both communities, there are going to be some people who might make gifts to the endowment out of some current assets because they're willing to make a gift right now. But it also allows us to have kind of an ongoing conversation about, what a bequest or some other type of a gift would be, because some of these things can be just something as simple as hey, I'm going to give 10% of my estate to the church. Boom, I'm just going to do a little codicil to my will and get signed, send it to church. It's all done. It could be something as simple as that, or it can be something that's more clever and creative. So Chris, why don't we transition from here? We're about 3:50, about 10 minutes or so to go. I want to make sure we get some of the kind of closing thoughts, but also some more questions in the chat too.
Yeah, would you like me to do this? The last couple of
Yes, please.
slides? Oh,
Yeah.
Lovely. So plan giving can drive results. So it'll help you grow. It gives you sustainability, the things that Pam and Jean talked about, just in terms of not relying just on annual giving. And it's strategic. We talk about plan giving is larger gifts because they're coming from places of wealth, which are major assets. They're easier gifts, especially during times of challenging economic situations. New money is getting transferred, $64 trillion by 2030. It's for everyone. We talked about people in their 40s can participate. People, and really what's key is making sure that you're consistent in terms of your stewardship and cultivation. And it's a true partnership. There's nothing more generous than giving to an organization after you passed and really making a difference. So the closing things that we would like to share with you is, it's really decide that you're going to commit to this, and you're going to decide to commit to a culture of gift planning, and you're going to commit to educating yourself and becoming ready to do this type of work. Understand your potential. The people in your parish, the situation, the missions that you do, the things that you want to accomplish, but understand what your potential is with your donors. Make sure that you have a plan. Every campaign has a case, has leadership, has a plan. You execute those things. Make sure that it's realistic. You're leveraging all of your resources, and then work and measure your success. And if you do those four things, 1 to 3 hours a week, 1 to 3 hours a month, you'll be successful, as our partner and friends have shared. So is there any questions? And now this is the appendix.
And then Chris, while you're going to get to that, there was one quick
Sure.
thing that popped up. Kurt, I think, had asked, what about in kind of having more of an open meeting for folks to come to the endowment or investment committee meetings? I don't know if I would necessarily, as far as CCS would recommend, having folks have that be kind of an open, because those are kind of working meetings. So my suggestion, kind of what I think CCS would recommend based on Kurt's questions for transparency and things like that, whether at the annual meeting or some other appropriate time, having a report out where folks could ask questions like that. And I think, as both Jean and Pam talked about, if you're weaving that kind of information in terms of what's happening, who's serving on that committee, that helps with not only a culture of giving, but also being transparent. So it's not some mysterious group, a secret group of 5 that are, holding our finances. So I think it should be, you'd want to think about where the appropriate thing would be. But usually those meetings, you have both investment professionals who are there to report out on kind of in the weed things, and then there's some volunteers, and usually the volunteers tend to be folks who have backgrounds in finance, tax, law, other areas, just involve folks. So I definitely think, Kurt, it makes sense to provide the right venue to that, where people can ask questions and they understand it. But if you weave it through enough other things too, it shouldn't be mysterious either. Sorry, Chris.
No, it's great. So this additional information, there's about 7 slides. There'll be 8 because I'll add the survey. the survey questions.
Very lengthy, very in-depth survey.
Yes, very lengthy. I'll show you. Pull up my files again, show you all the work that we did on it. But yeah, just more things about what we talked about: education, identification, strategy, and action. You can mix and match things together. Your gift acceptance policies, your strategy in terms of your vestry involvement, your donor engagement, just more things when you want to have conversations. And then as we talked about the Legacy Society, if you have one, here are things that you can do. Pam talked about auditing and inviting, putting things into campaign packets. New at Legacies, what do you need to do to start those? Action, measure your progress. Everything that you want to do, you want to be able to measure. And then just what Luke just talked about, just in terms of how do you communicate your benefits, to access the information and experience. And then this last one, before we get to the surveys questions, which will be added, just some unique, it's like the next step if you want to help educate your folks. Jean talked about when we did those education, we had the folks that manage their endowment come and talk to them about different deferred gift tools. And so that education is also very helpful for people that maybe have an opportunity to establish a trust or want to do a gift annuity. And then, of course, all of our important information if you want to reach out to us.
Again, I want to thank Jean and Pam, who are just great friends and great colleagues, for sharing their thoughts. And obviously, you can reach out to any of us for questions where if you saw yourself in the information. I want to thank our friends from EPN for really regularly doing great content like this, and also bringing people together. And the final thing I would just share with everybody is, like most things in life, it's not that hard. We make it hard sometimes. So sometimes you just need to simplify things. I think what Chris and Pam and Jean laid out for us is, if you just sort of take it a step at a time, and if you start to do this, only good things will happen. So it's as Chris talked about, a very simple way to do it is to sort of figure out who the right people would be to have a conversation about it, put together a simple plan. You can always make simple plans more complex ones later, but in the beginning, simple plans always work. So we encourage everybody to kind of keep the conversation going. And we're really confident that this kind of information can be very helpful to communities of all different sizes and all different places. So I want to say thanks to everybody. That Dick will come. You have our contact info. We'll have that lengthy survey shared with you. And I know Joe also would like folks to kind of click and do a little survey afterwards. So Kathy, do you cover everything?
Thank you all from EPN. Again, not Joe Swimmer, but on behalf of everyone at EPN, thank you all to the participants, and especially to our panelists. As a fundraiser for 20 years, I learned a great deal from today's webinar. So thank you so much for everyone and your time, and look forward to further webinars.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.